No further ado, I am going to introduce you to Andrew Meyer, the Director of Conservation for San Diego Audubon Society and the manager of the Rewild Mission Bay project. Before we get going with that, I want to remind you that you need to type your questions into the Q&A section, not the chat. So if you find that, you'll see that Q&A. Make sure you type your questions there. Andrew will talk for a while, and then we'll have a Q&A period where I'll ask the questions and he'll answer them. If you see a question in the Q&A section already and you think, oh, that's what I was going to ask, do a thumbs up on that one and that'll upvote it. So that way the questions that have the greater level of interest will be put up to the top of the list. How's that for technology with old people? Yay. Okay, so I also want to say one more thing. Andrew and the San Diego Audubon Society are well, not Andrew so much, but San Diego Audubon Society is the fiscal sponsor for Stay Cool for Grandkids, and we truly appreciate their help. They have been fabulous, such a great organization to work with. And one more thing that Andrew reminded me of, this past week is National Volunteer Appreciation Week. So for all of you that volunteer, who do all the great things you do, hooray, we're glad you're there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, I'm going to give it over to Andrew, okay? So with no further ado, here is Andrew Meyer.
Hello. Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you for that warm introduction for sure, and thank you to all of the volunteers that make Audubon Society and Stay Cool accomplish all of the great things that we do. We do a lot together, so thanks very much for the great work that Stay Cool does all the time, but it's great to be here in partnership on a project that we've worked together on for a long time. So I'm really happy to be here and happy to give an overview of the Rewild Mission Bay project to to the folks on the webinar. So my name is Andrew Meyer. Linda introduced me. I'm the Director of Conservation at the San Diego Audubon Society. Very lucky to have that position, be working at that nonprofit that's been around and doing great work for a long time before I was here for sure. I've been there for just over almost 3 years, so I'm relatively new. But one of the big things I've been working on is this Rewild Mission Bay project. So I hope that you know some about it, but I hope you don't know everything about it. And I hope that I can fill in a lot of questions and fill in a lot of answers, raise a lot of questions, and inspire you with this great project that we're working on with a lot of partners. So I am particularly want to grab your attention right up front here. I've been in a lot of Zoom meetings. It's awesome to hear that Stay Cool might be back in person at the end of the summer, us too. But I know we've all been on lots of Zoom meetings. So I want to grab your attention right here up front. If you're listening with headphones in, you might want to turn it down because it's going to be loud for a second. But this is a video taken from a nesting platform in Kendall Frost Marsh of the endangered light-footed ridgeways rails and their cute little black puffballs, their chicks. So this down in the bottom right-hand corner is an example. You've probably seen it out there. They're very obvious at high tide as the last remaining kind of dry water or dry land that's out there. At low tide, they're very hard to see. It's almost very hard to pick them out. But at high tide, like I said, they're pretty obvious. And in this video, taken from the top down inside one of these, you can see that the mama rail and the dad rail are not watching their chicks very well. There they are floating around. They're not going to win any parenting awards, but presumably they know what they're doing. The chicks can already swim, obviously, and are doing just fine. This is from just less than a year ago, last May and June. Several rail families, one of them, this one with 6 different chicks, were videoed on these rail platforms and the few rail platforms that Kendall Frost Marsh has these closed circuit televisions on. So that sound that beautiful sound of the Ridgeway rail, the chicks here, and the image of that water floating below them on this artificial nesting platform is there you go. It's grabbing it by its neck there. So that's what love is in the Ridgeway rail household, I guess. So this is just to grab your attention with a really awesome video. Again, endangered species right here in Kendall Frost Marsh, and really drives home the point about sea level rise and the need to kind of steward and manage many species, not just in Ridgway's rails, but puts in context the value of the marsh now and the precarious position that the marsh is in going forward. And so I'll start into the presentation with a little less lecking there by the Ridgway rail. So this is an aerial series of aerial photos for Mission Bay Marsh, and you probably all Mission Bay on the whole. You probably all know it pretty well, but it's a really neat time sequence from the 30s through the 40s and 50s when a lot of earth moving was going on, and then all the way on the right, this is the Mission Bay that we all know and love. Very much recreation focused. It's the world's largest aquatic park. It gets 15 million visitors a year. So very much focused on the human experience, getting into the water, swimming, jet skiing, paddleboarding, those kinds of things, sailing. And you can see over time that use has changed a lot with a lot of human input. So on the left-hand side, there's a huge tidal mudflat and wetland complex in the bottom right there. That's the San Diego River flowing into Mission Bay, which it did often in most years. You can see Crown Point there through all the series of them. And in the 40s and 50s, you can see some of these islands kind of just wink into existence as we dredged the bay to make it much lower, or much shallower, or sorry, much deeper, so that it wasn't as shallow, so that our boats didn't get hung up on the mud at low tide. It's gotten much deeper, and the shoreline has gotten much less complicated. Even though it looks like it's got a lot longer shoreline now, it's basically riprap and sandy shoreline and deeper water compared to that much more dynamic mudflat, tidal wetland habitat, open water, and fuzzy shoreline that you can see on the air photo on the 30s. So, and down on the bottom, obviously, like I said, this is very much focused on human recreation now on the right in most places in Mission Bay. Decisions that were made in the 40s, 50s, and 60s to dredge and make some islands ended up costing a lot of the habitat, a lot of the services that the bay was providing before the 30s. So on the bottom left is the endangered California least tern. We spend a lot of time, and probably many of you have as well, in previous years, trying to manage habitat for coastal dune habitat for these endangered birds. There's 4 nesting preserves in the bay, and it's one of the populations that is definitely not doing very well with human changes to coastal ecosystems all up and down the coast of California. We've been changing bays just like this and changing estuaries just like this, so least terns are losing out in a lot of places. In the middle there is an example of a rare plant. That's Nuttall's lotus, and it's one of the plants that needs coastal dune habitat as well and is not doing very well. It's a rare species that we have at a few places in Mission Bay. And on the bottom right there is a still view of the endangered Ridgway's rail. So that species in particular is one that needs coastal tidal wetland habitat. And in Mission Bay, it has lost a whole bunch of habitat, as it has in many other places, Bataquitos, Agua Hedionda, many places in Orange and LA County. In Mission Bay, you can see that in the 2021 photo, there's still one little fuzzy area of the marsh, of the bay rather, and that's Kendall Frost Marsh. So that 40 acres of tidal wetland habitat is the last 1% of tidal wetland habitat that was in this complex, this 4,000 acre complex in Mission Bay. So that's what we have left in terms of natural habitat, and that's what we have left in terms of habitat for the Ridgway's rail that we just saw in the last video. And we have some of them there. They're still hanging on there, as well as in several other marshes and marsh ecosystems on the coast, but they've lost a whole lot of this habitat, as you can see in this example air photo. So it's important to mention as well that we have a long human history here, way before the 1930s. Native Americans, the Kumeyaay, Ipai, and Tipai people have been living along the banks of Mission Bay, along the creek, the banks of Rose Creek, along the sides of Mount Soledad, and at the mouth of the San Diego River since time immemorial. So this map on the right here is a hand-drawn map. It gives you an idea of what the bay used to look like way before the 30s again, and what it looked like for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So there is long historical tradition, archaeological evidence, and cultural significance of this place to Kumeyaay people for a long time before this. So if we need an example of how we can live alongside Mission Bay without all of the loss of habitat that we saw in those last air photos, we have an example to look at right here. We have some leadership and some cultural perspective on how we can celebrate, how we can recreate, how we can pull from and use natural resources in the bay without looking at all of that dredging history that has relatively recently happened. It's only been about 75 years since Mission Bay changed drastically. And on the bottom left here is an example from the late 40s of how we started to pitch this as a very human-centered tourism attraction. It's a very cool little pamphlet here that folds out into a map of the bay that highlights all of the tourism destinations. So it's a good contrast here between what it looked like before the 1930s and what it looked like and what we've been using it as in the 40s, 50s, and 60s especially. So along comes the Rewild Mission Bay project. This was started by my predecessor, Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg. It's a project of the San Diego Audubon Society, though lots of folks have joined voices with us, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We got a grant from the Coastal Conservancy and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to create this feasibility study. Feasibility study is done now in late 2018. It was finished. We've shared it with lots of partners. It's available for free on our website, rewildmissionbay.org. And the great strength to this plan is that it wasn't our idea. It's a great idea, says me, but it wasn't our great idea. It builds off many of the ideas that were put into the Mission Bay Park master plan. So Mission Bay Park has a master plan from 1994, which is worked on. So the dredging and the drastic changes to the bay stopped in the 60s. 70s and 80s, people started realizing kind of what had changed, what that meant for flow of the water, what it meant for flushing, what it meant for habitat for birds and many other species. And in the 90s, with lots of work in the 70s and 80s going into it, Mission Bay put together with the city and the community the master plan. So that's from 1992, it was adopted in 1994. It was updated in 2002, but with just a few, it was basically digitized in 2002. So 25 years ago, the community had great ideas for wetland restoration in Mission Bay Park already. They focused on the northeast corner of the bay. They said on both sides of Rose Creek that wetland restoration should be considered, should be one of the main components of the land use there, and that improving water quality should be the first and foremost consideration of any land use decisions there. So this feasibility study, which came along about 20 years later, was helping to move the city along to get towards some ideas and some traction for wetland restoration in this part of the bay. The idea had been there for a long time, but nothing had happened before the feasibility study started, the Rewild Mission Bay project started. So this is where the study area is for our Rewild Mission Bay project. The black area is the study area, and like I said, you probably all know this spot pretty well. But here's Interstate 5 along the right-hand side of the map. This is the northeast corner of Mission Bay. Right now, major uses are the Kendall Frost Marsh Reserve, which is owned and managed by UCSD, as well as some acreage of called the Northern Wildlife Preserve, which is city property. 66 acres total, about 40 acres are tidal wetland habitat. Campland, which is an RV park and boat storage area, occupies 50 acres or so. De Anza Boot here and De Anza Cove, the yin and the yang, are on the east side of Rose Creek. And then there's lots of land uses in the park where the golf course is and some ball fields and some parking lots, volleyball, turf grass, those kinds of things. So these are the major land uses here. And the city is going through the De Anza revitalization planning process now. So this is an excellent time for the Rewild project to start influencing and pushing the city to adopt the right land use planning and land use priorities here. The city is in the midst of that planning process, and we've definitely been pushing them along with this information. This information from the Rewild Mission Bay project has gotten raised the profile for wetland restoration and the opportunity for wetland restoration here already. And that's basically what we're pushing for. So our feasibility study included several options. The one that we're advocating for was shown to be feasible in the Rewild Mission Bay study. It's this WILDEST alternative. So we're going WILDEST. We're all in for WILDEST as a feasible opportunity that really maximizes the potential for wetland restoration here in this relatively small corner of Mission Bay compared to the thousands of acres that the rest of Mission Bay Park is. So this is a quick general map, but the brown is mudflat habitat, the greens are low and high marsh, and then the yellow is transitional habitat, and the red is upland habitat. So we're pushing for a dynamic and full wetland restoration project here that includes some upland habitat, because those areas, those yellow and red areas, are important ecologically for a lot of the species that interact with the marsh, but they overnight or nest on dry and transitional areas. Though it's also important for these places to have some area to migrate into. So those yellow areas will become wetland as sea levels rise, and those red areas will become wetland as sea levels rise. So sea level rise is an important consideration here to be planning for up front as we think about what we want to design our park for the next 100 years. So the Rewild Mission Bay project, any wetland restoration project, has a lot of benefits. Bird habitat improvement was one of the things that certainly got our attention at the very beginning. But really, there's lots of reasons to support wetland restoration. One of the things that will be improved is the water quality of Mission Bay. This is a map from San Diego County that looks at and is responsible for putting out advisories about water quality, whether it's safe or not to recreate there. So here's an example of the Campland site. The northeast corner at the outflow of Rose Creek often fails the water quality test. On the county's website, Surfrider, also through the Blue Water Task Force, does some fantastic work here. It's a community science project. One of the places where they take water quality data is also right at the Campland location. And you can see here it fails that test for bacteria load. So this is a recreational standard. It fails it pretty often. This is up through the mid-January of this year. You can see about a quarter of the time the Blue Water Task Force Enterococcus, the bacteria levels here are unsafe for folks to get into. So a tourism draw, an important location for the aquatic park and the Mission Bay Regional Park that it is. You still, we should be telling folks that it's unsafe about every fourth time you get in the water. There could be unfortunate consequences from the water quality that is coming out of Rose Creek and is moving slowly around Mission Bay. So adding a wetland to this location will drastically improve the water quality in this place in particular. Switching out land uses for wetland restoration will improve the water quality there. And as the tides go in and out and mix with the marsh and increase, go over the marsh and then drain out of the marsh, all of the water in Mission Bay will end up being affected by and improved by the marsh in the northeast corner, if we seize the opportunity to embrace wetland restoration. Another opportunity here that we spend some time on and have been doing some coalition building on is the opportunity to increase and improve public access here. So this is an example. This is a map of the study area like we saw earlier, but there are some examples here of public access to our shared shoreline that really could be improved. The De Anza revitalization planning process that the city is going through will change these land uses here so that there is a shared public shoreline in the areas around Rose Creek. Much better, a bike path, a walking path. This area is public property, and it should have much better access for all San Diegans to get into and out of, like the rest of Mission Bay does. In addition, or specifically, one other opportunity here that the city has is to really help reconnect Native American communities to this location that they were forced out of a relatively short time ago. So there's a long history of Kumeyaay settlements along the area and Kumeyaay culture in the area, and we have been really pushing for the city to embrace empowering and reconnecting Native American communities in the management and the access to this area, to these new land uses, as a way of of restoring their place here and acknowledging their long history here, but also acknowledging the fact that they should be involved in the management and celebrations and use of this area going forward. And the last big one that we talk a lot about is, like I mentioned, I've kind of mentioned this a couple of times, but just that we should be planning for sea level rise here up front. The city was not talking about sea level rise when we started this project. We finished our modeling in 2018 and were able to come out with a science-based information about what this area will look like with wetland restoration put into it. And what this shows is that with 5.5 feet of sea level rise, which were the estimates back in 2017, 2018, we need a major investment in wetland restoration habitat now in order to have any of this kind of habitat remaining when you add in sea level rise. So a big investment up front leaves us with some of this kind of habitat, about 80 acres, which is what the Mission Bay Park Master Plan has called for 25 years ago. We should think about 80 acres of restored wetland, and something like the WILDEST gets us to that benchmark that the Mission Bay Park Master Plan set for. So we really need to prioritize this kind of habitat and think about sea level rise as we're planning for this area. The city has come along and done their own vulnerability assessment and their own modeling for sea level rise. They did it a few years after ours, and they were required to by a state assembly bill. So they planned for the pink area here is the state tidelands, and they modeled sea level rise here. They modeled even a little bit more sea level rise than we did. 2 meters is a little bit more than 6 feet. So with 6 feet of sea level rise as the planning horizon here, you can see that the map matches ours. Certainly lots of Mission Bay, lots of San Diego is going to have some very complicated situations, some very complicated land use discussions about sea level rise, and Mission Bay is no different. The northeast corner of the bay, where you can see De Anza coming out there, you really see a lot of blues, a lot of greens, and then even some of the yellows get up Rose Creek when you add 2 meters of sea level rise. So it's a big concern. Obviously, it really should be something that we're planning for now. And because of the Rewild Mission Bay project, with that information, with some visuals about what sea level rise will do to the area, the city has been coming along and doing some of their own vulnerability assessments and been acknowledging the importance of sea level rise some more in lots of other places throughout South San Diego Bay and the shoreline of San Diego, but especially in Mission Bay. We're pushing them to really be planning for this when they look at park planning. And the awesome thing about this sea level rise component is that not only does it make sense for us to put in wetland habitat that can be flooded, where there's no economic damage to our coastline when water comes in and storm surge comes in and sea level rise comes into a wetland, it not only mitigates, it not only adapts to that kind of sea level rise shoreline component, it also helps to mitigate some of it. A very small amount, really, in the grand scheme of things, but as Linda mentioned at the beginning, salt marshes, mangroves, and seagrasses. We don't have mangroves in San Diego County, but we have a lot of seagrass habitat in South Bay and Mission Bay. And we are talking about salt marsh restoration right here. They are amazing habitats at sequestering carbon. So if you think about it, it becomes pretty obvious. Sediment, dead plants, sewage comes into a bay, and it really settles out and gets locked away as you keep piling on and piling on and piling on. That's one of the reasons why they are a good habitat to deal with sea level rise, is that if the burial rate is correct, they can maintain that habitat as by growing and depositing more and keeping up with sea level rise. But regardless of that component, they are locking away some of the carbon that we are generating in our land use along Interstate 5 there. The restored wetland in the northeast corner of the bay would sequester carbon way better than the land uses that we have there now. So that kind of value to a habitat is called blue carbon. Blue carbon is the carbon that's captured by oceans and coastal ecosystems. This is a new slide. It's got a bunch of components to it from just the last couple of months, just the last couple of weeks. Specifically because I know Stay Cool is very interested in the climate change component of it and the carbon sequestration component of it. Blue carbon is a term, probably you've heard it a bunch. I've heard it only in the last 3 years, and then I've started hearing it all over the place. Like I said, the northeast corner of the bay, the Rewild project, which restores about 200 acres of wetland, is really a small fry when you think about this kind of habitat throughout the world and the amount of carbon that it will sequester. It's positive. It gives us a way of being proactive to mitigate sea level rise and mitigate climate change. But it's only 200 acres. It's not going to make all the difference. It's not going to solve climate change, unfortunately. But it does have a lot of awesome components to it, and it is something that is really getting a lot more research. Some of it right here in San Diego County, and a lot more interest from at the national and international scale. As you start thinking at a national scale, many countries have, if they start factoring in blue carbon into their carbon budget, it starts to make a really big difference as to whether they are meeting or not meeting their climate accord agreements. So many countries, Colombia, I just heard, has been really doing some great research on the value of coastal wetland habitats and blue carbon in order to help balance out the goals that they want to set for climate change. And so in some countries, certainly in San Diego County and the city of San Diego, the acreage of existing wetland and wetland that's restored really can start to make some of a difference when you add it all up. So it was just mentioned in this LA Times op-ed, which is a really neat op-ed about what climate change means and what does climate disasters that become worse as climate change worsens means. And there's some examples there of that really put money to the value of coastal ecosystems and green infrastructure. This other one from the Yale Environment 360 was just shared with me by a Rewild friend about why blue carbon is poised to really become much more of a buzzword. There's a project in Virginia that is just applying for credits for blue carbon sequestration through Verra, which is one of the companies based in Seattle that is starting to and trying to talk about how to verify the amount of carbon that's going into these kind of dynamic habitats. And then also very much related, but ancillary. This just came out just a couple of weeks ago, and I just wanted to bring it out there because it seems like there's going to be a lot more interest and information that's coming out soon as well. Is that some research which was actually looking at something else, a big research project in many of the world's oceans. They were looking researching some other component of fishing and realized as they went through it that trawling, kind of fishing where you scrape the bottom of the ocean and then collect things from that scrape, it releases an intense amount of carbon, as much as air travel, they estimated. So that just came out just a couple of weeks ago. It was part of this big report for global oceans, and it really puts into perspective how much carbon is locked away in many of our marine habitats already. Seagrasses, tidal wetland habitats, but also the ocean floor, which this article emphasized. So blue carbon is an opportunity here, one of many of the benefits that we would get from a wetland restoration, from really embracing the coastal opportunity that we have here in this park. This is an example of a land use plan that C3, one of our partners, came up with, which matches the boundary of our wildest wetland footprint, but makes it look a lot prettier. So this is the same acreage as our wildest wetland alternative, and then they add in some of the other park features which exist there and interact with a vibrant marsh. So they show kind of the public access opportunities for paddle boards, for walking, for group camping. They show how we can have just as many acres as we're currently providing to RV camping and low-cost guest accommodation in the park as well, and some even expanded neighborhood recreation opportunities with the soccer fields and tennis courts and ball fields at the top of the park. It also brings in some space for Wetland Education and Research Center, which UCSD is very interested in, and it does a much better job of connecting Rose Creek to the park than our plan does, and that the city has done so far. So that blue area, that orange line there, is the new trolley, the new public access opportunity that we have to connect people to Mission Bay Park, to bring them into this regional park without having to drive there. And it's a great opportunity for the city to be planning for the connection between Rose Creek and the new public transit options and this vibrant and healthy ecosystem that can only be restored here. It can't go into some other regional park that the city has, because there's not this kind of wetland restoration opportunity that is so coastal dependent. So we have these ideas. That C3 plan there, which is very appealing, is just one example of the ways that groups have kind of taken this Rewild project and started pushing it with us, and sometimes dragging us along. A lot of these groups are picking it up and running with it. One of them being Stay Cool. So thank you very much right off the bat to Stay Cool. We've been building this Rewild Coalition for less than 2 years. We have 55 organizations. Some of them, I'm sure you'll recognize their logos. Hopefully some of them you don't recognize their logos. We have been trying to build not only regional organizations that are thinking about labor and the environment and education, but also some very local organizations that are businesses and places of worship. There's several churches and the Islamic Center of San Diego, and many local groups as well. The town council and the planning group have put together comments about what they don't like and what about the city's plan and what they want the city to be focusing on. And many of those say point blank, we want wetland restoration to be prioritized here. We want the city to be thinking differently than they had been thinking up until recently. So we've been building this coalition with a lot of support through many talks just like this, with groups that are interested in pushing the city to embrace wetland restoration here as the land use priority, and then figure out how to make that restored wetland a recreational asset, an economic asset, and certainly a habitat asset. And the good news, there was some bad news back there when we started doing the Rewild Coalition, was right after the city had decided to postpone, kick the can down the road, and keep the land uses the same as they were for 5 years or so. That was the bad news that kind of kicked us in the butt and got us building this coalition and pushing for these ideas. We had some great news in October of 2020. So just about half a year ago, the city proposed to the Regional Water Quality Control Board for the money for a new land use planning alternative that had many of the same goals as the Rewild project. So our supporters were there at the regional board meeting in October. We spoke for more than 3 hours in 2-minute increments. A lot of supporters pushing the regional board, encouraging the regional board to accept this proposal from the city with all of these great commitments to it. And the best commitment at the bottom is that the wetland alternative that they will create with this funding will be reflective of existing feasibility studies. So we have a feasibility study, and we're quite excited that the city acknowledged that right in the supplemental environmental program. That's what SEP stands for. So we had a big win back then in October. We are continuing to push the city to make sure that this doesn't kind of go into a black box for 2 years while they plan for this. We've had many meetings with city council members, several meetings with mayor staff and regulatory agencies. We want to make sure that the city does a good job when they create this new land use planning alternative. But the fact that they have the money for it and the directive to do it is great news. It's good news. So the next steps, like I mentioned, we're still very active. We don't, without constant pressure on this, without a commitment from the city to do the right thing, we don't want to sit idly by. We have a Rewild Mission Bay website for sure, so check that out and sign up for emails from us if you're interested. We have a project now to tell the City Environment Committee in particular that the sea level rise, climate change should be something that they focus one of their meetings on this year. Equitable access to our regional parks should be one of those things that they focus on this year, and that the Rewild project is a great example of that that the city should adopt and should be promoting. So the council members would be who we're focusing on for that one, and specifically the council members that are on the Environment Committee. The chair is Chair Elo Rivera. As also on the committee is Councilmember Kate, Councilmember LaCava, and Councilmember Von Wilpert. So it doesn't work to click this link probably right now, but I'll make sure to take this and paste it into the chat box or the Q&A box when we're done here, and you can find it on our website. Clicking that link will take you to, will download a Word document template that you can put in your information. The email address is already right there of who to send it to, and we're trying to get as many people as possible to send it right to the Environment Committee chair staff, saying that the Rewild project is something that should come before the committee this year and that they should support. We just sent a letter out just a couple of weeks ago to the county and the city about including natural habitats for their carbon storage and carbon sequestration value in our climate action plans. So that we have done, and thank you to peg for being the back and forth on that for Stay Cool. So we just sent those out. I've heard back from several supervisors, as well as several council members, that they have that. They'll use it when they're talking to city staff about city and county staff about what the new climate action plans look like for the city and the county. And then also the 30 by 30 initiative is something that the governor has been pushing. It's an executive program that is just starting up. It's organized by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and there is a meeting on what that 30 by 30 initiative will do. There's been several of them, or there will be several of them throughout the state, but the one in San Diego is on May 11th. So there is also the website for that, and I'll make sure that I send a PDF of this to Linda when I'm done, and I'll try and paste that in the Q&A as well. But if you're interested in the 30 by 30 initiative, that is a project. We were pushing for it last year with our Audubon advocacy program, and it didn't make it through the Assembly and the Senate. We were very close, but it didn't make it through. But then the governor picked it up and adopted it through the executive branch, like I mentioned. It is talking and pushing the state to preserve 30% of the state by 2030. And that preservation, what that preservation looks like, what it includes and what it doesn't include, are some of the things that they're hammering out now. But adopting this thing and pushing for acknowledgement that at least 30% of the state is what we need in order to provide some of these ecosystem services, provide habitat, provide places for humans to go to get solace and mental health benefits, is a great acknowledgement, and it's one of the first ones in the country that is doing, the first states in the country, but many other countries and several other states are talking about this now as well. So good job, California, on that one. The context for this, I'll get depressing for just a second, but we're almost done here. The context for this is the Rewild project. At least for me, I see it as a small example of something that we can do. On the left here is a screenshot of the landing page for this research that Cornell Lab of Ornithology did just a couple of, maybe a year and a half ago, showing that since 1970, the United States and Canada have lost 3 billion birds. We are 3 billion birds poorer than we were in 1970. That doesn't even include much of the climate change impacts that we've been seeing in the last few decades. That's 50 years of habitat modification, endangered species or invasive species, pollution, those kinds of things. So even without much of the climate change components that we are projecting into the future, we are starting with a lot fewer birds and a lot of degraded habitat leading to that, which that research shows. On the right-hand side, Audubon itself did some modeling about what it means to have 3 degrees of temperature rise as opposed to 1.5 degrees of temperature rise, and projecting forward as we think about climate change and temperature change. A 3 degrees increase in temperature means that 2/3 of our bird species in Canada and the US are at risk of going extinct. So we really need to be doing projects. I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times. We need to be addressing this. We need our government and our representatives, not only ourselves, but also our representatives, to be standing up and doing positive, constructive, and sometimes hard decision making. The Rewild Mission Bay project is one of those, for me, that is very positive. So it's talking about restoring habitat. It's talking about improvements to access. It's talking about more bird habitat. But even beyond the specifics of the benefits, it is bringing people together. It is talking about proactive sequestration. It's talking about proactive opportunities for folks to get in there and start fixing some of these problems. So it's a very positive project to me and to many of the Rewild Coalition members. Many of the supporters see it as an example for where these are photos from the March to the Marsh, the Global Climate Action Day that happened about 1.5 years ago. 300 Mission Bay high school students came and marched and met 300 other community members. Kids got a chance to yell at adults and say, you're not doing enough. You really need to be prioritizing this. Get it together and start fixing the messes that you and your ancestors have created, so that we don't have to be the adults in the room to clean it all up ourselves. So it was really, really empowering. It's good to get yelled at. This is the example of the picture that was my picture at the beginning of this, was from this. It's very inspiring to see all these students and all of the folks kind of get involved and get active in a project like this. There will be lots of hard decisions. There'll be lots of places where there are industrial and commercial and residential uses of the places that are going to be impacted by sea level rise and climate change. But this is not one of them. This is a public park. This is a place where many of those land uses can fit right there if we just get the city to prioritize wetland restoration in amongst those land uses. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. Thank you for all of the support that you provided us along the way. And here's to a few more years pushing the city to actually do the right thing in this location, and then many more years of restoring it and relaxing and seeing what it looks like when we actually get our hands dirty and get the bulldozers moving. So thanks very much.
Andrew, I'm clapping on behalf of everyone who's clapping and you can't hear them. Woo! Yay! What a stunning presentation. And it is so sobering to hear that we've lost 3 billion birds in that short period of time, in my lifetime.
Yeah.
That is stunning and heartbreaking. You gave so much information for us to consider, and I feel like even though I've been looking at a lot of the things that were going on with the Rewild program, I have a much better understanding of it. And I wasn't aware of the work that San Diego Audubon was doing to try to connect the Kumeyaay Indian tribe back to, that Mission Bay area. I think that would be fascinating. I was just curious how that is progressing. Has there been, who are the people there that you're contacting?
Sure. Yeah. Good question. So we have several indigenous-led organizations that are in the Rewild Coalition, and one of them in particular, Renaissance, is the name of a Kumeyaay-led archaeological organization. The two folks that run it are archaeologists. They know a lot of the history of this particular area, but they also lead this nonprofit that's focused on reconnecting Kumeyaay to the places that are important to them, ancestral lands. So we have been working with them. We actually just got a grant from the Honda Marine Science Foundation to start those conversations focused on Kendall Frost Marsh between indigenous leaders and UCSD as it relates to wetland restoration, as it relates to wetland management and access. So we have a little bit of funding to actually kick that off and start that, but we are certainly encouraging. We've heard lots of positive things from the city about the need to be working with Native American partners in all of the regional parks, in many of the neighborhood parks as well. But certainly places like Otay Valley and Mission Trails, there is not a good example of a committee and a report and a dialogue back and forth about what indigenous leaders know about those areas already and how they can help manage those areas for the future. And we're hoping that Mission Bay Park becomes one of those examples, leading the city forward in reconnecting those people.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you. That was my own question. And now I'll get to the questions from other people. So I will look at these. So our first question is, can you elaborate on how you will connect Native, I just asked that question. That was from Laura Schumacher. I'm sorry. Native American communities to this area and the rest of our parks. You answer that.
Yeah,
Thank you. So,
I was just going to add that it's really neat to think about what the options are, but I am not Native American. I'm not leading kind of that planning part. We're just trying to work with Native Americans that know the area and that know the history of the area to be able to kind of plan the future for the area. So I don't want to, I don't have that kind of information yet from those discussions. But ideas about kind of what access, what celebrations, what harvesting should happen, and how to share that with everybody else too are some of the things that they're prioritizing in some of those discussions that we've been having. We're going to start on those over the summer and fall. So I'm excited about it.
Great. Very good. Very good. And Laura, thank you for that question. I'm sorry. Great minds think alike. The next question, you mentioned that there are no mangroves in San Diego. Can they grow here at all? I recently learned they're highly important to maintaining coastal stability.
Yes, good question. There actually were mangroves introduced to Mission Bay, and every once in a while, Isabel Kay, the steward from Kendall Frost Marsh, finds some of them growing in the bay. They were brought in from they exist naturally down in Baja. Groups like Wild Coast, many Mexican groups are focusing on their value for blue carbon and their value for habitat. down there in projects that are going on in Baja. So it's very exciting and very close. They just don't normally, or they just don't naturally get up into Mission Bay on their own. They don't do very well with freezing at all. Not that it freezes here very often, but they haven't made it here on the West Coast in the U.S. There are examples of them in lots of the Gulf Coast and Florida and Atlantic coast. So there are mangrove habitats in the U.S. for sure, just not on this coast.
Yeah,
They are
it's
great.
interesting because they do grow in Baja. I know I've
Yeah.
seen them in Baja, and it wouldn't seem like it would be all that much different,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
apparently it is.
So they're one of those plants that the range might change with climate change. It'll be hard
Yeah.
to discern, whether how much of it was just range expansion and how much of it was human facilitated, but they're close. And they do a great job as well of sequestering carbon, but so do seagrasses and salt marsh, which we have on our own. So we can focus on restoring and preserving those for sure.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, it says another question is, how would the year 2100 map of sea level rise change if rewild is implemented? Or would
That's
it? I
that's
think
a
the
good question.
question is, would it?
Yes, I have to be careful to not oversell this thing. So, like I mentioned, the blue carbon component it's fantastic that it's
Mhm.
not only mitigation but also adaptation to climate change. But it's a very small component in the grand scheme of things. The sea level rise map. I mean, the coastline will look different depending on what we do there, but the amount of sea level rise will not change. Obviously, 5.5 feet, 6.5 feet, whatever the newest iteration of the newest ideas about what we should be planning for by 2100. That's going to stay the same whether we do a wetland restoration project in
Right,
Mission Bay or not. It's
right,
it's way too large of a problem and way too small of a solution. But what we have control over, it helps for sure. And what we have control over is what kind of habitat and what kind of human infrastructure there is at those locations that will be affected by sea level rise.
absolutely, absolutely. All right, from Crystal, I see that Mission Bay Golf Course is affected by the plan. What would be the impact on the course and any opposition from people who want to maintain that course?
Yeah, another good question. So our wildest opportunity does not actually touch the golf course. So it's all focused on just south of the Mike Gotch Bridge, if that helps. But it's all where Deanza Point and Deanza Cove, the Campland area now, and Kendall Frost. All of that area is where we focused for actual physical wetland restoration. Mission Bay Golf Course could totally stay where it is, and we could still have a wildest wetland restoration. Just to be clear about that, we're not saying that the golf course has to go in particular, but if we can get the city to embrace prioritizing the land use of wetland restoration, then it makes sense that the rest of the park should kind of move around, and the priority for that space would change. If that C3 plan shows that there is space for low cost guest accommodation, many of the neighborhood recreation opportunities, and a substantial wetland restoration, by removing the golf course. So that's just an idea. It helps visualize how much space there is. Many of the local community groups have said that the golf course should be shrunk or eliminated as part of the land use here. It makes sense that the Coastal Commission will prioritize coastal dependent and coastal related land uses. Neither of which is a golf course. There are lots of other golf courses nearby, but this one doesn't need to be right in the spot where we're talking about wetland restoration
Mhm.
and coastal related land uses to wetland restoration. Um, there is opposition, obviously, just like it's totally understandable if I managed and used and loved that spot, I wouldn't want to move either. The Campland land use folks don't want to move either. So those are some of the hard decisions that we are pushing the city with and discussing with partners and detractors about how to prioritize land use here. So yeah, no surprise the golf course is not pulling up stakes and making room. So it's up to the city to prioritize what happens there as they plan in this Deanza revitalization planning process.
Yeah, yeah. The drought situation might make some decisions for the golf course you know, without a
Yeah,
lot of pushing from San
yeah.
Diego
That
County.
golf course actually is irrigated with drinking water. It's on the purple pipe. If I
Oh, recycled water, reclaimed water?
It's not reclaimed water. I think it's just drinking water.
Oh, potable water? Purple pipes is the reclaim.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that's which one it is.
It doesn't
But
matter. It's water that could be used for something else,
yes,
maybe too.
exactly. Yeah,
Right.
they use a lot of water for sure, and that
Yes.
one in particular, has some things that aren't going for it in terms of how much it's used and what it costs. In the last as of the last city audit of the golf course
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. Bob Leiter, our famous Bob Leiter from Stay Cool for Grandkids.
Hey, Bob.
Um, he said, you mentioned the 30 by 30 initiative. How do you see the role of San Diego Audubon changing as a result of Audubon California taking a strong leadership role at the state level in this initiative?
Good question. So San Diego Audubon is a local chapter. Audubon obviously also has state and national organizations, so it's mildly complicated how we all work together. We're not affiliated with the state chapter, but we work with them on a lot of projects. So we can do whatever we want, but we certainly work closely with Audubon California and support that initiative. I actually don't know yet much about what the state chapter of Audubon California has been doing in order to prioritize this. We worked with them last year to help get it through the assembly and into the Senate Natural Resources Committee. And then after it was adopted by the governor, we heard a little bit about the early planning for it. But I haven't been involved in any of those conversations, certainly. Um, the we support. I think this is a great idea. The devil is in some of the details, just about how complex it gets for what is protected currently, what we can do in order to get to that 30% or beyond that 30% conserved and restored area. So I don't know any of those details yet. I will be happily tuning in on March 11th to hear what the state is talking about for that project. I have heard that many of the other meetings in the state so far have been swamped by folks that are interested. So I don't think the state will get a whole lot of, useful feedback from 1,000 people on the hour-long webinar. But we appreciate having Audubon California involved in that process, and some of the what we can do and how we can bring it to San Diego County in particular. We'll certainly be in tune for, and will be affecting the coastal and inland components of what we do at San Diego Audubon.
Terrific, terrific. All right. It seems like wetland restoration would boost ecotourism in the area. Is that part of the plan? And I'm assuming that you had to do an economic analysis of sort of some of the things that would be um, uh, cost benefit for doing the rewild.
Um, I wish we did. We actually, so
Mhm.
the city has not either.
Yeah.
We have been encouraging the city to do it as part of that SEP project that I mentioned. They didn't
Hmm.
they didn't do it there. We have tried to get funding with UCSD actually to include an economic cost benefit analysis of different land use alternatives, because we certainly feel that the economics would pencil out in favor of green infrastructure with all of the ecotourism. Blue economy. Mission Bay High School is right there, and it has a blue tech component where a lot of the students work with other local marine and shoreline focused entrepreneurs and businesses. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of ways to go to get economic value from these things. We are definitely not talking about it as a loss of economic opportunity. Um, Groups like C3 have brought in some folks to talk about what generically is the benefit from places like this that focus on the blue economy and
Hmm.
ecotourism. But I don't have any good numbers on that, unfortunately. And the city is not required to get those numbers together as part of CEQA or anything like that. So we haven't been able to have the city do that work. But we are certainly looking for some researchers to add that component to it, because we think, either way, it's going to be very useful information. But we think that it's something that would really highlight some of the value of, we have some local businesses. We have a fly fishing company. We have a company that rents paddle boards. We have a sustainability company, all those kinds of things that are focused on getting into and reacting to this kind of habitat. They would all love it. And Mission Bay Park is already focused on recreation. There's no place in Mission Bay where you can do anything like this currently.
Hmm.
because Kendall frost is so small, it's dedicated towards just those endangered species. If we had a substantial wetland restoration, we'd be able to have places where we could paddleboard through some of those tidal tributaries and walk through some of those platforms at high tide and really interact with and learn from the environment a lot more than we can now. So yeah, I'm sure that it's an economic boon in many ways, but we don't
Yeah.
have numbers for that, unfortunately.
Wow. I think it would be really beneficial to have something like that done as well if you could get somebody from, you
Yeah.
know, UCSD
If
or
anybody knows
US.
anybody, call me.
Yeah, I will. I will. I think I know someone.
Okay. All right.
So I will. All right. Are you yet on the agenda for the City Council's Environment Committee? I think one of the things you asked us to do as one of our action items is to fill out that form and we request that they consider this as a topic at one of the city environmental committees meetings. But have you already been to the City Council's Environment Committee? And if so, how did that go?
We have not. We have not been
Mhm.
invited directly, unfortunately. The City Environment Committee just changed almost all of their members as of November 2020. So five of our council members are brand new, and all four of the Environment Committee members are new as of November 2020 with the new election.
Right.
So we weren't, we've been to many of those meetings and made public statements in many of those meetings last year. This year, we've talked to Chair Elo Rivera's staff. They have told us that this project and this idea fits under their equitable access to San Diego parks, which I think is on the agenda for September or October. I forget exactly what it is. So we definitely are keeping that on our radar, and we'll be there for that one in particular. Although I doubt we'll kind of give a rewild presentation like this.
Mhm.
But that form, which I think Sarah put in there and I just put in there as well. It's just a kind of form letter. It has the email address. You put in your own information. You can expand on your most passionate components of the marsh and why it's important to do that, and then send it off to the Environment Committee. That is to explicitly get them to kind of prioritize at that September or October meeting or in its own meeting about climate resiliency and planning for sea level rise resilience. There's a lot of opportunities for the Rewild project. I don't need to give a talk at all, but for the Rewild project to be an example of the kinds of project that the city should be looking at and partnering with groups on. So we're not
Awesome.
there yet, but with your help, we can get there for sure.
With all the people here and many others, we will make sure that we get that done for you. So, does this project have an advocate on the city council?
That's a good question too. So yes, like I mentioned, five of the city council members just changed, so many of them are new. We've met with all five of those actually. So now we've met with every council member over last year and this year. Um, Councilmember Moreno has been very supportive of this project. She was on the Environment Committee last year and said many things about how the Rewild project was an example of how we really need to do constructive and positive things, and we really need to put our money where our mouth is. Kind of statements. They were fantastic. Um, in the meetings that happened in the summer of 2019, the city almost decided to really start wetland restoration right then, and it lost by a 6-3 vote and then by a 5-4 vote. So many of those council members kind of know about this project and appreciated it then. Um, Councilmember LaCava has been to Kendall Frost Marsh and has said he actually has a sea level rise resiliency meeting next week, I think, with some folks from Scripps and some folks from USD and Laura from Surfrider. So he's been prioritizing this as well. He asked lots of great questions and had lots of really good answers about his interest in this project. And we've had lots of positive meetings with many of the council members, like I mentioned. There hasn't really been an opportunity for them to go on record and vote for anything since 2019. So this Environment Committee component is really what we're encouraging them to do is work with the city staff so that you don't just get this wetland restoration opportunity or wetland restoration plan in 2 years and you can either vote yes or no on it. They really should be telling city staff along the way is this is what I want to see. These are my priorities, so
Yes.
that city staff is working in the right direction between now and when that new alternative gets done. So that's our focus is with council members. Um, I can't think of anything in particular that's on the docket for city council that's specifically related to this. So it'll be more of kind of the letter writing and environment
Mhm.
committee and behind the scenes kind of stuff for the next year or so, as far as I know.
All right. So, can you tell us a little bit more about how Lower Rose Creek and its delta might be modified or improved by a rewild project?
Yeah, good question. So one of the things that did just come up that was voted on, it was a coastal commission project, so not our city council, but at the coastal commission, the city's Balboa Avenue Station specific plan, if I got that right, was just
Mhm.
approved by the coastal commission. It was a There's lots to like about the plan, but one of the things that wasn't is bad about the plan is that it really doesn't embrace Rose Creek and the land uses and the park, establishing it as a park, and the investment that needs to be made in it in order to get it ecologically functioning, and not to mention functioning for humans that want to recreate and use it as a bike path and that kind of thing. So we need to do a much better job and be much more focused on connecting Rose Creek,
Mhm.
from Rose Canyon all the way down to the mouth to the Rewild project. They're obviously physically connected and ecologically connected, and our project includes some of Rose Creek and talks about restoration there. But I think I need to do a better job of making sure that this wetland restoration project includes restoration of and kind of adoption of Rose Creek in all that it needs as it goes along. And Friends of Rose Creek, many other groups, the Environmental Center of San Diego have been leading on that, and we've been pushing for that as well. But I think we can do a much better job than we have been. What can happen with a restored wetland here is that, so basically one of the many of the ideas we had at the beginning of the Rewild project was to make a much more obvious delta, to have Rose Creek kind of be much more sinuous than it is. And what our engineering showed was that too much water comes out of Rose Creek sometimes, out of the high flow coming from Rose Creek would blow out any kind of sinuosity, or not any kind,
Oh,
but any
wow.
kind of delta or that kind of thing that you could have,
Mhm.
unless you hardened the shoreline and made it stay exactly where you wanted to. There's
Mm.
too much influence of freshwater flows coming down Rose Creek in order to make it very sinuous and make it very braided, that kind of thing. So our Rewild Mission Bay project didn't want to harden the shoreline. It wanted to expand it out so that it can interact at high flow with its floodplain as much as possible. So that's what it focuses on. It tails it so that it goes in towards Kendall Frost Marsh, on its way out into the bay, so that more fresh water interacts with Kendall Frost Marsh and the rest of the restored wetland. But what it also does is increase the place that it has to flood. So when it's high tide or high flow, that water will be flowing into the marsh as well as flowing out into the bay. And that was the way that we could figure out, in order to deal with some of those high flow events, was to tail it towards the marsh, or tail it towards, yeah, where the marsh is now, and then
Right.
also make sure that there were tributaries coming off of it, so that at lower flow it was really snaking into the rest of the marsh much more effectively than it is now.
You guys are brilliant.
Oh,
Very
I didn't,
good.
yeah, we hired a good engineer for sure. Yeah, so I mean, it's a bummer in my opinion. It would be great if it could be a real obvious delta, that the fresh water coming out of Rose Creek could flow right towards get to all of those things, all of the pieces of the northeast corner of the bay. It's just hydrologically it wouldn't stay there for very long, so it's not worth kind of trying to make a river go where it doesn't want to go.
Right.
So instead, the opposite, or the response, is to make sure that it gets into the water, into the rest of the bay, as it moves down the main stem of the creek.
Yeah. Andrew, this was fabulous. Thank you so much again. I appreciate your effort, all of the people's efforts in the Rewild Wild option. So I really
Wildest,
learned
wildest,
what?
wildest. Yeah,
Wildest.
wildest.
Yes. Rewild Wildest.
Yeah, it's really
So
special.
I'm just thrilled that you were able to speak with us. There are some more questions, but we're out of time right now. So I am just going to thank you very much. I'm going to let our listeners know that on May 18th, we're going to have an intergenerational workshop. Stay Cool is working with Leaders 2020 and the Climate Reality YEA pod, which is high school kids. Leaders 2020 is, young professionals in their 20s and 30s. And we're going to have an intergenerational discussion about climate change and existential threats and all that kind of stuff. It'll be interesting. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And with no further ado, I ask all of you to just stay active and stay cool. And that's all. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.